Welcome to the 1% Doctor Podcast. What separates the good from the great, the standard from the extraordinary? It's mindset, it's execution, and it's the relentless pursuit of growth. I'm Adam Lamb. I'm your host. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the 1% Doctor Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Lamb. Today, we have with me a great friend of mine, awesome physician, and I'll even go to say an amazing business person. And so if you doctors out there listening that are curious about how to expand from provider to entrepreneur, Dr. Christian Morris, our guest today, is figured it out. And he's a great physician, a great man. And so we're super excited to have you here on the podcast, Dr. Christian Morris. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Glad to have you. You know, we've been friends for a while, and I just think you bring so much value to the show and your experience, not only in medicine, but your experience as a business owner and scaling and building a business with a great vision. And I'm excited for the guests to hear about that. But first, let's start out. Like, why did you become a doctor? Like, what led down that path?
Yeah, I mean, since I was a little kid, I always thought it was cool what doctors did. They helped people. And I always found that to be rewarding and fulfilling to help people. And then as I got older, I looked at it as a way to, I could also provide for a family and have a job and help people, and also test my limits. I knew that, you hear stories that it's very testing to become a doctor. It's very difficult. And so, it was, part of it was that as well. And I really didn't, it's interesting. We'll probably get into this more. Growing up, my dad was a banker. So, I thought of him as a business person. And I always thought, I never want to do that. He goes to an office every day and just sits there. Well, I was completely wrong. Initially that turned me off from wanting to go into business. And so, decided to become.
It's interesting that we can have a story of our childhood, and the story isn't true, but it can create almost a box or a container or a limit to what we might think is possible. Where you and I, both business guys, probably spend a lot of time working from home, wearing t-shirts, making our own schedule, because we don't. And I've done that. I was a loan officer. I worked at a huge online lender. I worked at a bank before, and I know, like, going to the bank every day wearing a suit, I hated it. Right. It wasn't, but before that, I was in the restaurant business and bartending and some of those things. So for me, I felt like, I grew up, I'm mature. I got the big boy job. And then I was like, I kind of hate this. And, which led me to want to become an entrepreneur. And I launched my first company in 2012. And so, it's a cool perspective, because there's people our age, right, that are listening to this that might be like, they have a story or a vision of what being in business is. And today it actually can be so much different. I think there was a time when, like, everybody wore a suit and whatever, they did whatever, rode horses and trains to go do business meetings, but we get to have Zoom and do things a little bit easier and have more fun and spend more time with family and things like that too, to have that work-life balance that we really desire. So you chose, you're a physiatrist. And so kind of how did going through medical school, getting into that process, like, why did you choose physiatry? Anything in particular?
I went through rotations and really enjoyed focusing on people's function. So it's called physiatry, or physical medicine and rehabilitation. Our focus is function and getting folks as functional as possible. And that always attracted me when I heard that, because I got a little, I don't know what maybe the right word is, but maybe jaded in medical school, that it was always throw a pill at the situation.
Right.
That was the logical conclusion to most problems. And I really enjoyed the idea of, let's get people's function back. We use medication sometimes, but we can also use other things to help them regain that function. And so I think that was something that very much attracted me. And, I liked the ability to see people progress. So go from point A to point B under my purview, they come and stay in the inpatient rehab hospital, and I get to see them improve on their own.
Yeah.
And that very much attracted me to that.
And so much to the point, I think, where you saw a massive need in the medical marketplace to come in and provide a service, right? That's where it starts. I think a lot of physicians or just, entrepreneurs, anyone listening from that standpoint is, man, if you can find a problem that you'd like to solve and you're willing to go all in to figure it out. And that was kind of my story with on the hormone side is I saw how hard it was to find knowledgeable physicians that were willing to listen and help with hormone optimization and like optimal health and functional medicine is kind of the more of the buzzword today and some of that stuff. And so I wanted to create a business that helped facilitate that for people that were hungry for it. And so you've gone from, as a physiatrist, like where did you start before you pivoted? Because now you have a company doing this all over the country. Like, where did you start the physiatry practice? And at what point did you kind of have that aha moment or like, man, I think I could like, like where did the pivot kind of happen?
Yeah, I mean, so I had my first job out of residency in Albuquerque, and I was working in nursing homes and, helping folks, enjoying what I was doing. But the more I got into the world of nursing homes, which is what I live and breathe every day now, I just realized how underserved they were. And that was my first glimpse was I thought, well, maybe it's in rural areas or kind of more poor areas that nursing homes are underserved. And I came to find out it's everywhere.
Yeah.
That nursing homes, the medical complexity is increasing and, they're just underserved. And so that was my first kind of aha moment of, wow, this is everywhere. This is a huge need. And I'd always been interested in the business side of medicine. There's business side of medicine is kind of looked at as the boogeyman of medicine.
Right.
You're going into the dark side. I mean, that's literally what it's called sometimes. I just thought of that and I thought, well, let's explore that and see what that really means. And I think one thing that I learned very quickly is physicians, when you talk about the business side of medicine, they automatically turn off. Not all of them, but most of them.
But I see it a lot with the guys I coach, or they have guilt and shame around wanting to make more money. But if you're helping more people solve more of their health problems, that's a good thing, right? And you should be compensated for it, right? So versus, I mean, it's not you're not selling snake oil, you're not, there's shady people too doing bad stuff, and they might call it business. But for the most part, but you're right, there's a lot of physicians that think when you start talking about the business side and you start talking about wanting to make more money and scale or do something like that, oftentimes they've been conditioned through maybe just society, we could say, to have attached guilt and shame around wanting to create more. But I've always looked through the lens of like, man, if you're a good person and you're trying to help people more. I mean, for an example, I know that there's a doc that you work with that we both mutually know, and in one of the facilities you guys are in together, their opiate use has gone down like 50%. Right. So it's like there's stuff like that that's like that because you have a business that comes in as an expert to solve these challenges, you're actually prescribing less opiates and like something like that. That's huge. What every single nursing home needs that, right? And so there's a different lens of how you look at it. And thankfully you look at it through the lens of how you can help more people and you get to win too by scaling a business, right?
Yeah. I mean, that encapsulates it perfectly. I think a lot about value, adding value to society, adding value to nursing homes, and not simply seeing patients and making money. I know that that will come with adding value to nursing homes and adding value to society. That, to your point, if I could take a population of 75 people that are on opioids, whether it's in the nursing home, whether it's they're at home, wherever they are, and I can cut that in half, within the span of a month, I would say that adds more value to society than a lot of people do in 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah, agree.
You know, the the opioid epidemic that we call it, it's rampant. It's still there.
Still,
It's right in our faces. And so to your point, it's the adding of value. If I was a snake oil salesman, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't want to go on a podcast. I wouldn't want to have my face seen. I'd want to just stay in
yeah,
the shadows and
you're
sell
right.
the snake oil.
You'd want to hide, right? That's I like that. That's good.
Yeah. So, I think a lot about that on a day-to-day basis of, how to add value to nursing homes. And coming back to when I started this, it was I just saw a huge need. And, I talked to a lot of colleagues. I talked to a lot of people in the industry. And I just said, why isn't this being done? It's kind of this, and it was something that was, everybody was kind of waiting around for somebody to do something.
Mm,
And there's other players in the game for sure. But I just looked at it and I said, nobody is trying to reverse engineer this process and add value to the patients' lives and to the nursing homes. Nobody's speaking to the nursing homes directly and their needs as well. They're
yeah.
very heavily regulated. Nobody wants to understand that and try to add value there. And so I thought, you know what? You know, who am I to do this? But it's worth giving a shot. And so that's really where it started was, me identifying a need and of seeing if that need was legitimate or if there was a legitimate way to go about, filling that need. And the more and more I got into it, the more I realized nobody was willing to take that risk. And I thought, okay, well, I
I
don't
will.
see it as a big risk. I didn't. I thought, what's the worst thing that could happen? It doesn't work. And I
Yeah.
go
People
back to
tell you
being a
no.
doc and yeah,
Yeah. And I had the same experience when my first company in healthcare was a telemedicine company in 2012, and people thought I was crazy. You're not a doctor, you didn't go to, you don't know medicine, like all these different things. But I was so passionate about solving a problem that at a small scale, I was able to help seek. So when I started my first company, I was being kind of a concierge for these high profile guys that I was doing health coaching for, and realizing that they were struggling. These guys had endless money. So like to me, I thought, why was it so hard? These guys are rich. I'm going to find this service that they need. And so I helped kind of create it. They were willing to pay for it and get a lot of help from it. And then I was so passionate about doing it that I just wanted to help these people. And I like, part of it for me too was I loved being in a position to help people who I thought had it all figured out. Right. And so being able to provide a business that did that, and then it just scaled. And here's the other part, we talked about the snake oil piece is like, never marketing, never running a Facebook ad, and the business growing 60% year over year for us and our company, 100% on referrals. Right. So like, that's when you're doing a good job is when so many people refer you to, the next nursing home or the next nursing home or something like that because the service you provide is so great. And that's when you're doing something good and it's time to step on the gas, right?
yeah. That reminds. I mean, so yesterday I was on a call with a nursing home administrator, and it's a marketing call. I'm trying to get into the building, and at the end of our conversation, she says to me, "So what's the catch?" And I said, "That's a. I'm so glad you asked that because I've had to adapt this for you know a year of taking these calls and taking these questions and what is the catch? Well, I've tried to solve for all of those catches
Hmm.
such that at the end of our conversation now, you're going to say, well, what's the catch? And at the end of the call, we're getting into that building because she said, it seems like you've solved this. I don't, every question I ask, you've thought it through. And I joke that I've thought it through and I have a joke for every question that they ask. So I try to keep it somewhat light, but for every question that they ask, I have a response that's a legitimate response, but I have a joke behind it and so I think they really appreciate that. But what they don't appreciate fully is I've had to evolve and adapt everything that we do such that at the end of those conversations, I get to hear them say, so what's the catch?
Yeah. And then, like it's because there's that we've also been to condition that something seems too good to be true. It probably is. But the reality is just someone hasn't taken, like you said, is no one just took the time to start doing it, right? To start to solve a need and not understanding, and there's so many things too in business, I think, where we can't allow somebody with a limited perspective to limit our perspective on the opportunity because someone might not see, like what you do is lucrative. It helps a lot of people. It's a almost unlimited market to scale. And, like I said, we know each other, but I also know, one of my clients is a doc you work with and just hearing from him also what it does and how it helps people and the ability to partner with you, like other docs that are interested in getting into this space with you. There's a way to do it. And it just brings, like I said, like when he shared with me, it's like, hey, this one nursing home would drop their opiates in a couple months and like by 50%, like that's huge. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But I think when you might be dealing with an administrator that sometimes they might be in their own box of what's possible, they didn't think of what you thought of. And so
Yeah.
they don't understand how you could do what you do because they
Right.
haven't thought of it yet, right? And so and it takes some patience, and I think I love that you have it with a little humor and joking because sometimes you have to lightly do that because we also know there's a lot of egos, especially in administration and healthcare and dealing with doctors,
Oh, yeah.
and so the ability to softly kind of and playfully kind of have humor around certain things, but at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, seriously, I figured this stuff out, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's a great way to build relationships and also to get in the door with some of these places that you can help serve at a higher level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, to the ego thing, everybody's got an ego. I have an ego. But one thing I learned very quickly is if I want to get into the buildings, my priority number one is get into these buildings and do a good job. Well, what do I have to do to get there? I had to drop a lot of my ego.
Yes.
This is how I want to practice medicine in a nursing home. Well, a nursing home is very different than a hospital. And so oftentimes when I talk to docs, I have to start from zero and say, you're not working in an acute care hospital. You're working in a different setting. And one thing, and it's part of the jokes that I use when talking to nursing homes is I'll say, well, they'll ask me, say, oh, do you work with a lot of docs? Who do you work with? How do you deliver this? And I'll say, well, we do it a few different ways, but as you know, doctors can have somewhat of an ego. I don't know if you've worked with them, and they all laugh and they say, oh no, we've never seen a doc with an ego. And it's like, you get a lot of, I trained at XYZ medical
Mhm,
school, a residency, and this is the standard of care, and this is how it has to be done. And it's a complete misunderstanding of how nursing homes operate.
mhm.
And so oftentimes I will work with PAs and nurse practitioners because they're more often they want to be a part of a team and they want to adapt and they want to really contribute in a way that's not isolated like a doc wants to come in and do what he or she thinks is standard of care for XYZ med school, XYZ residency, and it's like that's just not how nursing homes operate. You got to drop the ego and come and work in a nursing home.
Well, and you have the street credit today of like the proof of kind, right? Like that you're like, there's a part of, and that's, a lot of the consulting I do today can be in the telehealth hormone optimization space because I've literally done it hundreds of times. And so some of the large companies in there, they bring me on board to advise in that space because I have the track. I've seen hundreds of thousands of patients. I know what works and what doesn't work. I know what's compliant, what's not compliant, what like I can tell you that's going to crash and burn in 90 days. And it seems good before you implement it, and you've done that work now with with your business to where, again, going back to that situation of where people perspective is lacked by their lack of experience, and your experience can supersede that, but you still have to sometimes deal with an ego or an administrator, somebody like that might not understand it. And so I think some of the challenge for someone like you, and you figured it out, but I'm sure it took time, is how do I give them this information in a way to see it so it's not defensive or it doesn't challenge, their ego as much. And at the same time, you have this irrefutable evidence that you continue to stack up with tons of nursing homes that you do this with to show better outcomes, all these things too. Just, and there's a part of that, like I think you mentioned, and doctors aren't taught this, almost like I call it sales or seduction skills and just how we communicate. Hey, look, doc, I totally understand how you would think this wouldn't work. And yeah, it makes sense. Look, in medical school, they taught me this, and this, but I started doing it this way. And now that I have 10,000 patient plus proof of this is a different way, and then kind of showing it to them. And like, and this goes into like the sales skills. Cause I know doctors, I call it with the docs I work with, I want them I turn them into the mayor. Right. So I'm like,
Yeah.
you went to a physician. I need you to become a mayor. I need you to go out, shake hands, meet people, build relationships, open doors, you know, which is different. You're not taught that. Right.
Right.
And so it takes a skill. And also with your own ego, right? You have to drop your own ego to say, man, I got to learn this skill of communication and marketing or sales or whatever you want to call it. Because at the end of the day, me getting in this facility, yes, it's good for my business, but I know it's better for this facility if I get in versus not get in there, right? And almost creating it like this mental duty, like it's my duty. I got to do what it takes to get in this facility so I can help these people at the highest level, right? And that
That's
commitment.
literally that encapsulates how I think. And the two people that I really have to convince to get into a building is the executive administrator and usually the medical director or the primary care team. To speak to that, that building where we have that mutual doc, we had to convince both. But once we got in and we cut the opioids in half, you would think, okay, that's the red carpet to get into any other building. We have cold, hard facts.
Hmm.
This primary care medical director, doc, he should be data driven. Well, no, he's a human. I think one thing that people forget is that doctors have the same human incentives as everyone else,
That's right. It's good.
literally the exact same. And so we're not these cold-hearted, data-driven people that, that's all we do. We're susceptible to every human incentive. And so to your like sales and seduction part of this, I have to adapt to the primary care team. Some of them, they get it, come on in. Some of them I have to convince even after cutting opioids in half in a building that they're in. Well,
Mhm.
why can't I come into this other building you're in and I'll do the same thing? Well, we just don't know. And you're just kind of like, what is really, is that ego driven? What else do you need? You have cold hard evidence that we're the right tool for you. So what's the holdup? And sometimes it's ego. Sometimes I've found out later that it's they don't like that we are successful
Right.
and
Like,
they're
yeah,
not. They don't like us coming in and showing the facility, "We're cutting opioids in half." They should have been doing that, and
yeah,
now
but
they're
they
not.
didn't really know how, or they didn't believe it based on the container or the the perception that they had, and you guys come in and do it, and that's part of this sales and seduction skill is like, I want the outcome I want no matter what, right? And so maybe it's like, hey, look, medical director who has these other facilities, I might have to I might hate this guy, but I got to learn to love him, and I got to get him to love me, and I might have to say, look, like, it was your idea for us to come in and look at the success we're having. I think it would be great if it was continues to be your idea to get us in these other couple facilities too. I mean, look how great you're going to look, right? You have to position it. The part of your flesh, like of who we are, right? Of just all being human is you want to choke the guy. But the other part of
Right.
choking the guy doesn't get me any more facilities. And so, and here's the funniest part about the conversation we're having. None of this is taught in medical school. It doesn't have anything to do with medicine, but it has to do with the things and skills we have to learn if you're a doctor and you want to go into business. Just going to have to deal with some different hiccups, right? Like there's certain things in medicine, like, hey, if this happens, do this, right? But when it's like, how do I deal with a challenging medical director that I'm trying to, like in learning, like the just, that's why I call it sales and seduction. But, it's just like, you got to start reading books on how to communicate with people and how to like address an ego and diffuse, like, and there's those skills that come along. And that's the gap. Sometimes someone might look at you and say, well, I went to a better, more prestigious school than him, and we've been practicing the same time. How's he doing this? Well, there's all this, I call it dark work, all these skills that you had to learn, all the times you had to ask somebody and they said no, and you had to figure out how to go back, and you kept going back and you learned to, solve problems and communicate differently. And that's none of that stuff's taught in medical school. And now you can read some books to it. And, a lot of the docs that I coach, I'm teaching them all these skills that they didn't learn in medical school to help them grow in that aspect of it. Because what now is that, like, that's some of the most important skill sets you can have to scale and grow the business, right? And at the end of the day, so you can help more people at a higher level.
Yeah, I mean, that's, from the time you start med school, go through residency, there's really one or two paths that they want you to do, which is, you go into academia or you go into private practice and, you have somebody run it for you and that's it. You're there, you're at your clinic or you're working in academia, and there's obviously some other avenues in between, but it's never even thought about. The administrative side or the business side of medicine is always looked at as, don't deal in that. It's overly complicated. You just need to be seeing patients, and that's what's going to produce the best outcomes for patients. Is just continually see patients. Don't they don't teach you how to negotiate a contract.
Mhm.
They don't teach you what it means to get credentialed with an insurance company. They don't teach you these things that are integral to to so much of what you do.
And do you think that that's what keeps a lot of docs like sticking to the system? Because some of those once you're on the other side of it, like, it's not that hard, right? It's not that hard. You can hire some people to do it. You can figure out how to do it if you want to do it. Like, it's all of those things are not that hard. And that's kind of part of my pitch with some of the docs I work with. I'm like, dude, I didn't go to medical school. I'm not a doctor. I don't have an MBA or any of these things, but I figured out how to do this. I was scrappy and it took me a little longer and I had to fail a lot more than you'll have to. Let me show you how to do it faster, right? And so I think a lot of docs stay stuck because of what you just said is they have that story of like, I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to do that. And but the reality is like you're smart, man. You became a physician. You're smarter than most people. You'll figure it out. And there's so many things today from a technology resources, third-party companies that can help you speed up some of the things that you're talking about there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the simple answer is it's not that difficult. It's going to take a little extra effort, but if you got into med school, you went through med school, you went through residency, you're very much competent to do it. It's just about skill acquisition. You know, when I interview a lot of PAs and NPs that are brand new, and whether they sign on with us or not, the number one thing I tell them is acquire skills. That's what people want. You know, you can train at wherever, you can go to the most prestigious, wherever. And at the end of the day, if you don't have the skill to actually improve people's lives and help people, it's irrelevant. I would much rather have a brand new NP who is willing to learn, adapt, gain skills than I would an MD, PhD that went to, prestigious university and is unwilling to get their hands dirty and figure it out.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And even in the past, even like I shared in the past when I was in the mortgage space, is I never wanted to hire somebody that had been doing mortgages for a long time because there was going to be an ego, there was going to be their way. When we knew we had a better way to do it, I'd rather hire that young, hungry, gritty person who is like, man, I want to learn. Teach me. I know I don't know what I need to know. I want you to show me the way. And sometimes those people actually become way better producers and performers, especially when, someone like you you've helped so many thousands of patients. You have a path and a process that just works, right? This isn't theory anymore. This is like proven time and time and time again. And so somebody coming in that may have somewhat of that experience, but not to the extent that you do, that wants to do it their way. Or like we talked about, that medical director is like, no, this is how it should be done. And you're like, dude, I've helped like X thousands of people do it. This works better. I know it's not traditional. I know it's not what was taught in medical school, but it's in line with it, right? With best care, but it works better from an outcome standpoint because you've proven it. And so being able to just grab an NP who's like hungry to learn, I want to do some kind of cool opportunity, and you can show them your process, right? That's what a lot of physicians don't realize is like, look, once you've created the protocols and the process, it works over and over, you can have these mid-levels come in and be your hands and feet so that you can help more people, right? And if there's something that shows up, and I'm sure it does, where it's like a little off protocol or like that, we're all humans, right? So there's always some crazy unexpected thing that could pop up randomly every now and then. They have you to reach out for it, help solve the problem as well,
Yeah.
right? In that
Yeah.
process.
I mean, I couldn't say it any better. Um, Seems like you've done this before. Seems like you've been you've been around the
A
block a
lot. I've
bit.
worked with a lot of doctors, so I know.
Yeah.
I know, like you said, all the questions they might have. I've worked with them all and helped figure out a lot of this process.
Yeah. To speak to, I think one thing that I'd like to speak to is kind of what are looked at as soft skills. So communication, salesmanship, that type of thing. That's always kind of looked down upon in medicine. And I think it's kind of a sad situation because there's a lot of fragmentation in medicine. The thought, when you talk to someone who's new to healthcare, you bring them in and they're like, well, most of this should be solved for. And you're like, no, this is not solved for. It is very fragmented. So I don't want to self-aggrandize, but it takes doctors who want to change things and want to shed light on issues, and nursing homes, extremely underserved. How do you go about doing that? Can I call my senator and say, hey, we need to get nursing homes to be served better? Sure. Can I advocate on boards and things like that? Sure. But how about doing the nitty gritty? How about doing the hard work of setting up a company and developing sales skills, they're called soft skills, but it's so integral in everything that you do. You could take it to the micro where it's, how do you convince somebody to get off opioids? That takes salesmanship.
Yeah.
That takes those communication skills. And if you go into those rooms and you have ego and you have cold hard facts and you have, and you don't have those communication skills, those salesman skills, you're going to fall flat on your face. So you could take it to the micro, which is the individual patient, or the macro, which is me convincing nursing homes. And you'll find this funny. I deal with nursing home administrators who 6 months ago were, playing college football, or they were salesman for XYZ company.
Yeah.
And me, who I should have more of an ego about it, I should be going in there and saying, hey, dude, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I
Right.
know what I'm talking about. It's a source of frustration still to this day for me where I'm convincing someone of something that I already know, that I know these patients need, and I have to convince this person and come in at their level. So the guy that played college football, I have to say, hey, you remember when you got those knee injections in college to play football? I do those for patients. Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. I think our patients do need that. And it's like, no, I know they need it. I'm not asking you. I'm just trying to convince you and try to
I
illustrate the
want to
need.
connect. Yeah. Well, what it is too is connection, right? And explaining to whether it's docs communicating directly with patients or, like you said, administrators is if and that was one of the challenges I've seen with docs when whether it's selling. I also call it messaging. Like, how do you deliver a message, right? Is it just cold hard fact, or is there a skill and a strategy in how you relay that message? Because here's at the end of the day, if you and I are talking and I'm trying to convince you of something, my facts don't matter, but how you feel in that conversation matters actually more. Do you feel heard? Do you feel like I understand your needs? Do you feel like I am a good resource to help you? And all those kind of things, because then you're more likely to say yes versus I'm going to tell you all the 10 things I'm convinced are really good,
Right.
but I'm not considering the person who I actually need to convince their needs. Are they feeling heard? Are they feeling seen? Right. And so teaching those skills to doctors, even in their messaging, and they want to run ads. And I watch their ads. I'm like, dude, if someone didn't go to medical school, they don't even know what you just said. So like we
Right.
have to, and then here, what is the patient? They don't directly, consciously feel like you don't understand them, but subconsciously, because they didn't understand what you said, they don't actually think you understand what their needs are, and they're more reluctant to say yes, right? And then they feel less connected. There's a more of a gap in their relationship versus being able to, so many docs want to throw around all the big words. We know you know them because you went to medical
Yeah.
school, but I don't know them. And if you don't talk to me in a manner like you use the analogy, the administrator and the injections in the knees, it's a connection thing, right? So I think you having the skill, even to whether it's like you said in the micro level of connecting with patients. So they're like, hey, that makes sense, doc. No one ever explained it to me that way. Like, I totally understand that, even if it's an analogy. I love analogies, right? And because it helps people to connect. And that if you're able to do that, you're going to get more people to move in the direction you need them to move, right? And even we talk about sales skills of where like it's almost this dark side of selling, but I'm like, look, if you believe this is the best thing for the person and that's what they should be doing, you have to do whatever it takes to get them to do it, right? And if that skill gets 50% of the people off opiates, that skill's required, because the
That's a
obviously prior to that,
fantastic way to think
there's
about it.
people that didn't have that skill and they're not getting the outcome, right? So and so it's so important, and that's why I love our conversations and talking about this, is because if physicians will take the time to learn some of these soft skills, like reading some of these books, not just on medicine or not just on business, but like communication. I think one of the great ones of How to Win Friends and Influence Others is I think Napoleon Hill, or is that Dale Carnegie? One of it's up here behind me somewhere. But
Yeah.
either way, a great book that just adds perspective of just how to get people to listen to you, how to listen to people better, how to communicate better, and when you can develop the skills, which obviously you have, and I'm sure you continue to work on it, right? Like it's something. There's no peak to it. It's so important. So I'm so glad you brought that up. It's rare that a physician brings this up in the conversation.
Yeah. Real quick, I mean, there's a couple things to unpack there. One is you just illustrated my point of you read a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. You forgot who authored it. That's okay. I don't know who authored it. I read it, but you remembered how it made you feel. You remembered the feelings you got from it. And so few people are fact driven in their lives, meaning, or statistics, they do everything statistically based.
Yep.
So few people do that. I mean, it's almost impossible to do anyway. And
Hmm.
so, I can't tell you how many times I've had difficult conversations with patients and they'll tell me I'm the first doc that will ever have talked to them about that. So, and I'm one thing about me too that I think that really helps is I have very little shame. And it stems from what I think it stems from is my mom. and the self-esteem that she gave me. I think that is so underrated, self-esteem and the ability to do hard things when you have that. So when I was probably in second grade, third grade, someone called me a name, stupid,
Mhm.
you're an idiot, whatever. And I went home, I told my mom, and I was sad. And she said, "Well, are you stupid?" And I was like, why would my mom? I was taken aback. I was like,
Yeah.
my mom's asking me if I'm stupid? I said, well, no. She said, okay,
Right.
well, then it's just them saying it. It was so profound. I mean, there's,
I love that.
so many other things, but it was that sense of people talking is talking, and giving me that self esteem to, I can go into a nursing home and be totally rejected. Yeah, it burns for a second, but then on to the next.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but it's not a big deal, right?
It's not,
And there's
it doesn't reflect on me as a human. I have self-worth, I have self-esteem. This is on to the next. And so coming back to the stories about patients where I have difficult conversations with them, I'm able to have very difficult conversations that others would deem very uncomfortable.
yes.
So I can't tell you how many times I've told patients, hey, you know what will really help your pain is if you lose a little weight. The obesity conversation is another boogeyman.
Yeah, it's like
Oh
you're
my
mean
gosh.
for telling them the truth. Sometimes they just need to hear it from the doctor. Like, hey, just tell them. Like, don't you don't have to call them fat, but hey, if
No,
you lose some weight, it's going to change some of the stuff. And maybe no one ever showed you. Like, can I help you with some ideas around nutrition? And like, there's just some stuff that's an empathetic way of doing it versus a
of course.
condemning way of doing it.
All with empathy, all with, I 55, 65-year-old men that I've talked to, and I say, hey, I'm going to do this knee injection, but what's really going to help is to lose a little weight because you're carrying around a lot more and there's other things going on that don't help your body with having this extra weight. And they'll say, doc, you're the first doctor that's ever told me that.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
it's
you
crazy.
have to block out the potential for, you know, the political, which is, body shaming, and you're going to do this. And you just have to say, I know what's best for patients. I'm not perfect. They're not perfect. I'm not claiming that, but you have to have those difficult conversations. So if I can have that conversation, of course I can have a conversation with a nursing home administrator and
Yep.
be told no and take a hike and you move on.
Sure.
And so, yeah, well, just to finish that, it's just those difficult conversations are difficult if you make them difficult.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just move on.
And part of it, and I'll use an analogy here too, but part of this and what I hear you describing too is your capacity to manage discomfort. Okay. And so most of our limitations as just people, whether it's our health, right? You could talk about obesity. The capacity of an obese person to limit that hunger or that satisfaction or just the discipline is just, it's smaller than the person that's like fit and goes to the gym. And so it happens oftentimes in business too, where there's just almost like this weight, right? There can be a weight of things. And like for you being further down the path than, but let's say maybe someone else in your space, you've taken the punches, you've had the uncomfortable conversations, you've realized it's not life or death. And like, one of the things you said that I love, and it's something that I really try to teach is like, you don't carry shame. I don't either. I don't carry guilt and shame. And I know what it's like to do that and trying to teach other people like, look, do I screw up sometimes? Yeah. And I say, I'm sorry. I can't turn back the clock. I'm never doing anything viciously or evil with a negative intent, but like sometimes I might forget to call somebody back, or sometimes I might be late, or sometimes I might say something because I'm hungry and I probably should have said it nicer to my wife. But I can say, hey, sorry, that was bad, my bad. But I don't carry that guilt for 3 days, right? And so, but some people they could carry some shame, like we're talking about from decades, right? Like had you not maybe had that turn where you're stupid, and every time someone says no in your head, you start telling yourself you're stupid again, you never take off, right? Just many people, like if they're willing to address, this is where that personal development side comes into it. But part of that unwinding some of those things increases your capacity to manage the weight, right? So it's just like you and I can, thank God, we could both walk real well. But if I had to run 10 miles right now, it would be a different story. And so but if I started training for it, if I got up and started running a little bit every day, that 10 miles becomes my new capacity versus the old version of me, right? So I think some people just, you got to get yourself out there, have uncomfortable conversations, pitch some people, try some stuff, do some things. learn in the failure, right? And just keep going. And that's what you're really articulating, which is awesome.
I think it's what you're speaking to is the routine of discomfort.
Yes.
Be comfortable in that. I'm not saying I'm perfectly comfortable in all situations, but I've learned the most by saying things that I thought, and then I was told, "You're wrong, and here's why."
Mm.
That's where I've learned the most.
Yeah, it's great.
And it doesn't you could talk to me about any political, any, big emotionally driven type of situation. I mean, how many of those do we have today?
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to politics, when it comes to medicine, even whenever, let's have those conversations and you can feel as strong as you want, and I can be on the other side. And let's learn from each other and get to that, get into that discomfort. I like the discomfort
I do too.
because that's where growth happens.
Yeah, because
Growth does not
I wanna
happen.
learn another perspective. I wanna learn better listening skills. I wanna learn to have a conversation that I mean, it's almost impossible to frustrate me anymore in those kind of conversations, but I wanna continue to challenge that side of myself, and others should too. And I think one of the things you pointed out too is I think doctors specifically, in my experience, going through medical school, all about, testing and scores, there's this strive for perfection, right? It is like, I'm okay with telling someone like me having an opinion on something and someone telling me I'm incorrect and showing me how, and I got a chance to learn. But your rate, imagine if every day you got to be wrong about something and learn something that's 365 times versus the other person who might raise their hand once a month. Like it takes 20 years for that person that raises their hand once a month to like be wrong and learn, to the person like you that might do it every day. It takes 20 years to catch up to the information and growth that they're doing. It's wild. So like I love being wrong. I love,
It's
I'm the annoying guy that raises my hand and every say like, I want to know, I want to, right. But that's how I learn fast.
Yeah,
Right.
it's the sign of, I think that it's one of the greatest signs of wisdom.
And
Not
human.
not knowledge, but wisdom, because, I recently brought on a CEO to kind of level up professionally, and I'm like, "Hey, come in here and tell me where I'm screwing up.
It's awesome.
Come in here and I'm gonna tell you what my thought process is, you tell me yours, but come in here and say, 'This process is wrong.'" Have no fear in trying to change things and in trying to level things up, because now that he's been on board for 2 months, we're already, I mean, it's palpable, the leveling up professionally, the improvement in processes, the improvement in so much of what we're doing, and, I'm to the point now where I'm like, what was I doing? What
Yeah.
was I doing
Yeah.
before?
Why'd it take so long for me to make that move? Yeah.
What why? And it was a lot of it was ego. Well, I'm gonna stay and run things I've done it my way,
Yeah.
and, I'm making
I
good
figured it
money. Who
out. I'm
can tell
further
me
down
what
than
to do?
yeah, figured out more than most. Like there's all these stories that happen. And I have similar conversations, I think, with the docs that I coach, is it's very similar too, of like they reach a point where they're like, all right, I don't know what I don't know. Like come in and show me. And then like we have just things just take off at a massive way. And it's funny to be able to look back. And I love that you're able to look back at that, right? And say, what took me so long to
Yeah.
and I, same thing. Like I told you, I started my first company in 2012. I brought on my first business partner in 2017. And the maturity that I had as an entrepreneur business owner was next level. And this guy had like a $10 million exit, some of these other things. He'd really great numbers guy. I was always like, I'm not really a numbers guy. I'll just kind of drive sales, but I needed to become one. No, now today people hire me to come in and bring those skills to the table that I didn't have 10 years ago that I had to learn and I had to fall in love with and continue to learn. Right. And so and I think someone like yourself, that's where like docs that would want to work with you, and things like that is like how fast they can learn because you get to collapse the time, right? That all the time that it took you to figure stuff out, you can coming alongside of somebody like yourself. And that's why I think a lot of docs hire me as well, is just to speed up their learning curve. Like I can just take you through a process in 10 months. It took me 10 years and you can start winning really fast. That's awesome. I love seeing that. And I love like hearing how your business is continuing to grow and scaling. Cause I think what you're doing is great. And there's just really like an endless amount of opportunity for you to continue to help more people. If there's some docs that are listening that were interested in having a conversation with you about what you do and how that they could work with you, right? Because I know that you do a lot of those kind of relationships, what would be the best way for them to reach out? Or is there, and we'll put all that in the show notes, but
Sure.
is there anything that you want to share with them if someone might be thinking, man, how could I do what Christian's doing? Or how could I work
Yeah.
with him? And how could I learn?
I absolutely love collaborating. I'm a direct, person. So cell phone, email, call me directly. We'll set up a time. We'll chat. We'll see if it makes sense. I'm happy to impart my knowledge. I learn a ton from the conversation. So I'm happy to share notes. Happy to share in really everything that I do. And so direct communication, send me an email, call my cell phone, text me. I really enjoy the collaboration with like-minded physicians, and even if you're kind of skeptical and you're like, hey, this dude, is a snake oil salesman, challenge me. I
Mhm.
talk to me about it. If you're a cardiologist, if you're a nephrologist, there's ways to scale. I don't know that field exactly, but I know that owning your own thing and doing your own thing that way, is very well worth it. So, yeah, I would love to chat with you. Just direct communication is best.
Yeah. What's the best email for them to reach out to you at?
Two emails. One is my personal, so christianblake.morris@gmail.com. And then my work email is c.morris@rehabphysicians.org. And then, happy if you want to text me, if you can even prank call me if you want. My cell phone number is 801-891-1038. Text me, call me. I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, and if you're a nursing home administrator or facility too that would like to have a conversation, that I'm sure he'd love those calls as well. And you can also reach out to me if you have my contact information. Happy to get you connected with Dr. Morris to explore more. Because I've known him. I get to see what he's doing. One of the docs I coach, is a mutual friend of ours that we work with. I get to see, the details, the intricacy of the business, the growth, and who you serve, and like it's awesome. And I think if I were to just hear a 30-minute conversation about it, I wouldn't understand the magnitude of how well you help people and why every single nursing home should have you and your team in there. And you can, like, there's unlimited, like you build the entire thing. It doesn't cost them anything. Like it's awesome. And
Yeah,
it's a great model. And to your point, if you're in other specialties, there's an opportunity. I think those specialties could crack that code like you did
100%.
at physical rehab side. So I want to thank you, Dr. Morris, for being here today. This is an awesome podcast. It was great. Just you brought so much perspective and so much conversation around, I just the soft skills is what was super, but it's so important, man. It might be how you ask your wife out. It might be how you get your kids to behave at dinner. All of those things matter, right? It all matters. And in the big picture of life, and it can matter so in your career as a physician as well. So thank you for bringing that up and being proof, right? You're not just some guy with a theory. Like, you got a really successful business. You've used these things to do this stuff. So that's why it's awesome. I took a ton of value from this conversation today, and I think the listeners will as well. So thank you, Dr. Morris, for being here. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the 1% Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Adam Lamb. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and family. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the 1% Doctor. Please be sure to subscribe to the show where you're able to consume more podcasts, get more value, and learn more about doctors potentially just like you. Please tell a friend, review the show, and we'll see you in the next episode.